it's made me look back at Mr. Billy, both his biography and in Surprise Kill Vanish. SOG was a lot different. Vietnam was a lot different. You know, you've got to be stealthy. You've got to be good in the woods and ambush your enemy, kill them, what have you. But when you're doing surveillance and all of that, you know, it's not hiding in the woods. You've got to blend in as a civilian. It's a totally different world. And just the way that both of those men, especially Mr. Billy, and the situations that he gets into with Osama bin Laden, the Jackal, it just is a testament to his skill and drive as an operator.
He was such a unique person in that regard. I mean, I sometimes think about the Pentagon as a war machine, and I think about the CIA as an intelligence factory. So one is executing actions, and the other is about essentially trying to keep big actions from happening by committing to smaller direct action missions. And one of the reasons why I remain amazed about Mac v. SOG is because it stands out in such a unique manner. When you consider you have the Pentagon and the CIA as these two massive institutions, SOG, Vietnam SOG, was a place where these two very highbrow concepts merged in a way that perhaps was mimicked a little bit in Afghanistan, a little bit in Iraq. I write about this sort of in a very almost poetic manner, I think, in Surprise Kill Vanish, because I hope readers take away from that what I learned in interviewing all kinds of SOG guys and all kinds of guys in Afghanistan is that these missions involved a kind of not only a physical prowess, like where you just had to be such a badass and such a fearless special forces guerrilla warfare style operator, but you also had to function with a kind of intellectual capacity and a resilience and a flexibility like unparalleled in any other environment that I can think of. And okay, maybe if you look at the OSS, it was born there. But when you look at Vietnam SOG, it enters a whole different era of modern warfare. And so it's endlessly interesting. And we can talk about all the books that I can, I mean, John Plaster's SOG book, many of them he wrote, but the book of photographs, I think, is a great place for anyone who's maybe new to this area to just start. You can get it on Amazon and you look at the photographs and I think you are rendered speechless. And then from there, you begin to read and learn about what these guys were doing behind enemy lines.
Here, I'm going to bust out a very special photo that I was given. This is very early on. I've got several of Mr. Billy, but this is Captain Larry Manus, who actually was the fourth team leader jumper for the Halo, or maybe the second. And then, of course, we've got Mr. Billy right here, loading up to go jump out of a King Beat in Vietnam, no less. People just have a hard time grasping, and it'll come up about the jumps he was doing. I mean, I'll save that for later about y'all's trip. I believe Cuba, where y'all are Halo jumping, and he kind of gets into it a little bit with some of the instructors. But with Mr. Billy and getting all of the SOG stories, you brought up Mr. Plaster. After getting close with Mr. Billy, did he kind of more or less open the black book for you to kind of get help with other SOG men getting to Mr. Plaster, or how did that come about to really get you solidified in SOG info?
And that's always the job of the reporter. You know, usually, I mean, in some instances, sources will say to me, I will say, oh, can you introduce me to your friends and colleagues? But then in equal measure, the reporter, the investigative journalist that I am, also reaches out to people on your own. I do that so that you're not just speaking to the friend group, if you will. You want to be able to hear many sides of the story. You want to be able to hear people who didn't like Billy. You want to, and then the author, me, can determine, oh, perhaps they're envious of his incredible capacity, or maybe they are correct in what they are saying about X, Y, or Z. I mean, that is the job of the investigative reporter, to try and have a modicum of objectivity. That's again loops back to what we were saying, where you try to not be as friendly as you might wind up being while you are trying to report the story, because the reader requires, or rather the reader, when you're going to hear from a third person like me, the reader signs up for a little bit of objectivity. In other words, if you're going to read a memoir of Billy Waugh, okay, you are going to know, you are getting his firsthand account, his POV. But I have to look at the other ways in which to interpret those missions and present them to the reader. And I think, on balance, you take away what you will.
And I gotta say, just from firsthand experience, that can be kind of tough when you really get to know these guys, because they are so likable, so nice, so kind, and and Mr. Billy did have his detractors. So some guys, he was gung ho, hard charger, and did it the way it needed to be done, and some people, wanted to take it a little bit easy, and weren't necessarily wanting to go that gung ho. So that's a testament to you as a writer of getting the entire circle of the story. There's actually, we'll go, since people are asking about some of your process with Mr. Billy. I guess we'll jump into some of the questions real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Jason had one about speaking. Sorry, guys, new computer still messing with me. Jason Holmes says, I've seen in an interview with Billy on YouTube where the host kind of had to be helped by Billy to ask the right questions. Did you face that early on? Did he ever get very excited about any certain question?
I'm not sure what it says. The host kind of had to be helped by Billy to ask the right question. I'm not exactly sure what that means. So maybe just one more,
Maybe, I think if it's the short 30-minute ones, he was kind of not up to date on what Saul did. He thought maybe they were a little more infantry wise. He didn't really know they went cross border.
Billy? Okay.
No.
Oh.
Yes, ma'am. The host did.
Yeah. Okay. And again, the reason I say this is I know there was a couple interviews with Billy when he was like in his 90s, and I'm not sure that was really fair to have Billy be doing those interviews then. I mean, the guy operated for 50 years, and of course you're going to mess up a few different events. So I thought that might have been referring to that. But when I think with anyone who's a real sort of apex performer in their own profession, and I think now I understand the question, is the short version would be they don't want their time wasted. I mean, they're going to be more forthcoming with individuals who understand the lay of the land. And the more you know, the more really intriguing questions you can ask. And that's just process. You can't, I, as a reporter, find that I go into subjects, I try to go into them with a reasonable amount of information, but usually I say to people, can I interview you a bit and then come back, and then we'll do an interview in a general way. And may I come back to you when I am more informed? And then what they talk to me about initially, I can go off and do a lot more work. I hope that answers it.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and I believe that is the one. I think it's the one there on the out porch, on the like a porch setting outside. That one was kind of, I didn't really like them putting Mr. Billy in that position like that. But he held his own, and to that end, he did do pretty well. Jason, another good question. Were there any names that brought joy to Billy when y'all were talking, or any names that you brought up?
Mm. I mean, I spent a lot of time with Billy Waugh, and then also during COVID, I went a couple times to his home and filmed him for a documentary that we're eventually going to have on him, and so, you know, let me try to think about how to really, Billy had an incredible memory, and he, for all of his bravado and all of his, people might accuse him of having a big ego, he was profoundly humble, and he was so grateful to so many people. If you read the book Surprise Kill Vanish, and every single one of those names, from his first grade teacher to the individual guys, that photograph you showed in particular, when they were training to halo jump, Billy, of course, did the first, selected the first combat halo jumpers. He was on the third mission in Vietnam, and they trained in a tiny island off the coast of Okinawa called Ishimi, it was called. And Billy and I would look at photographs, and he could remember the names of all of the different indige that they were working with. He remembered their names. He knew stories. He told me stories. I couldn't fit it all into the book, but that man was deeply honored by everyone who came into his life, and he conveyed it.
And that's one thing that's so amazing. And even when I spoke to him in his later years, his memory was beginning to fade, but when I called him on a good day, I mean, he was still sharp as a tack. And folks don't realize, well, they do after reading your book. I mean, he went from being on a conventional Special Forces A team with Paris Davis and David Morgan. I believe that was the man's name, David Morgan, where he was injured at Bong Son. He ended up getting into SOG and immediately going to Khe Sanh. Then he went to CCN, he went to CCS, and if I'm not mistaken, for a short period of time, he was also at CCC. So he was at a lot of different places, and everywhere, every CNC he served at, men come up to him when I would see him at SOAR, just come up and thank him, and he knew exactly who they were, what team they were on, what year. And I mean, it's amazing to see it in action like that.
Mm-hmm. If you want to talk about Oscar 8, the mission that that Billy,